Good evening, everyone. February 2nd, 2022. Time for episode 18 of The Last Admiral. We'll pick it up one page back from last time at the top of page 141 as Wraith battles the deadly Coven assassin. Sorry for the delay in this latest episode between the blizzard and a treatment on my esophagus. I've been a little bit busy. So anyway, let us carry on. Okay. Zhao could not understand why Wraith was not dying. In fact, he seemed to have somewhat recovered. Nevertheless, he still had one final trap, one card up his sleeve yet to play. In just a few more paces he would reach it. The sisters had helped him with its construction. No trap had ever been devised so well, a blend of magic and mechanics that should finally rid the world of Wraith Victoria. Lunging backward, he slashed the vine that triggered it. The earth, which had seemed so solid, like nothing more than the natural forest floor beneath him, vanished. Beneath Wraith was a black, lightless void. Whether to somewhere or nowhere, he could not know. A few forest vines hung down near him. His reaction time was perfect. Dropping his dagger, he caught one, and it held. Hanging above the void, certain doom lay below him. Zhao sheathed his sword and stood gloatingly. "A valiant effort indeed, Guildmaster," Zhao said. "Better this fate, I think, than the one my sisters had in store for you. I'll make it quick." Grasping something next to the skin of his forearm, he drew forth a long needle. "Somehow, my poison hasn't killed you. But no one could possibly withstand the bite of the Guer Arakul twice." It was then that Fiddler crawled out from beneath Zhao's cloak and deposited some venom on the point of the already poisoned needle. "Goodbye." As he reared back to throw it, his arm suddenly stiffened. Looking down, he saw a 6-inch spear point covered in blood and protruding from his chest. The needle tumbled from his grasp as he sought in vain to remove the barb. Struggling to stand, he grasped his sword hilt and pointed at Wraith. "My dying wish is that you will die with me this day." Falling forward as his life departed, he disappeared into the pit, along with one islander's spear and a very unfortunate spider. Wraith was never happier to see any soul in his life than he was in that moment to see Fu. "I thought that I told you to leave the assassin to me." "You can punish me later." Working fast, Fu cut a long, sturdy vine away from a tree and held it over the void for his friend. Sheathing his sword, Wraith grabbed it, just as a massive, scaly hand reached up through the darkness and grabbed his right leg. Fu caught Wraith's wrist and braced his feet into the lip of the void. A terrible roar emanated from the beast that held him, like the angry cry of a distant, enraged lion, and yet it lingered hauntingly near. "Don't you let me go, Fu. I've got you." What ensued then was a titanic tug of war, with an unfortunate guildmaster between them. Fu felt the giant's strength coursing through him. Sinking waist-deep in the earth, it only anchored him more. Wraith cried out beneath the strain. Without the power of the girdle, his own strength could not have matched the forces that then vied to control him. But he was yet only flesh and bone. Another roar from beneath them, and it was clear that neither side would let up before victory. He drew his sword, but his body, stretched to its limits already, could not reach the abysmal hand that bound him. Remembering the prophet's words, he knew that the time had come. "Fu, you have to let me go." "Never," Fu declared. "I won't let it take you." "You're tearing me apart." Fu's face was a mask of torment, with a quiet resolve he released him. Wraith snapped downward like the jaws of a crocodile, slashing at the exposed wrist of his tormentor with all his might. Severing the hand, Hell's Gate closed and Wraith fell, piling up awkwardly in a heap atop of the forest floor. Fu climbed out of the ground and went to him. Wraith lay still, with a demon's hand, yet clutching his leg. Fu pried it away and cast it aside. Trying to grasp at emptiness, it twitched and then lay still. No breath came from Wraith's mouth. Fu put his ear to his chest and listened, but his friend's heart beat no more. "I must work quickly," affirmed a voice from within the jungle. "There is still time. His soul fights on." Fu turned toward the sound, preparing his bow and nocking an arrow. "Put that down," commanded the laughing witch. "Help me to remove his clothing." She knelt down beside Wraith, and her nimble fingers went to work, peeling what remained of the blood-soaked rags that used to be his clothing, revealed a wide array of wounds. Shrapnel, splinters, and scars from past battles. His armor was miraculously intact, but his body beneath it was not. A wide dark bruise revealed broken ribs, and his right shoulder was dislocated. Swollen and cut, Wraith's face was expressionless. His glassy eyes looked like those of a freshly killed deer. The madwoman examined him intently, comparing the color of his fingernails and his blood-stained eyes. "Fu," she urged, "catch the hares and bring them to me." Fu had not seen the hares until just that moment. Tall and fat, they hardly resembled the rabbits that they had eaten the night before. The animals were quite tame and easy to catch. Handing them to the witch, she whispered into their ears and then held them over the guild master's body. Suddenly, Wraith's chest heaved and he took a long, gasping breath. His eyes widened in shock and pain, but his throat was dry, and his scream was at most a pitiful expression of agony. A moment later, the rabbits began urinating, and lo, where their magical waters fell, Wraith's wounds quickly mended. Convulsing beneath the awesome healing power of the rabbits, Wraith passed out. The laughing witch and her magical rabbits healed Wraith's body, but her work was not yet complete. "Spider venom still flows in him," the madwoman explained. "Bring me a vessel, and I will draw it out of him." Fu had no cup. His pack was somewhere lost in the jungle. Remembering Wraith's sword, he borrowed it and clove a coconut in two. Pouring out the milk, he handed the container to her. Placing one hand over Wraith's mouth and the other above the coconut bowl, she began to chant in an ancient, nearly forgotten tongue. Soon, vile, black liquids began spilling out of her opposite hand and into the vessel. Completing her work, she muttered a few words and cast the cursed poison to the four winds. "Protect him until he wakes," she ordered. "This is not your journey's end." Digging into one deep, worn pocket, she removed a durian fruit. Whispering into it, she held it to her ear as if to get a reply. Convinced that it had answered her, she handed it to him and instructed, "Eat it, and you too will heal. In the morning, there will be a sign." "You and Wraith must follow it. I will tell Umlanu of the bravery of his son. Farewell." Clutching her hairs lovingly to her breast, she walked into the jungle and disappeared. Fu, quite astonished by the events, turned to his friend. Making him as comfortable as one could be on a muddy jungle floor, he covered his body with wide, heavy leaves and sat down to eat his durian. The smell was strong, but it was ripe and delicious. His strength returned soon after. He would never think of the laughing witch as a lunatic ever again. His journey was revealing to him the enormity of the world and the depths of his own ignorance. He was only a simple fisherman, after all. Commodore Carradine meets with Admiral Don Federico Gravina, in Jade Harbor. The Armada sails for Sicily. Ululu. The twilight just before the dawn found midshipman Sang Han in the crow's nest. The air was crisp and breezy, so he buttoned up his duty coat and drew his hood close. Despite an extra scarf, heavy trousers, and sound shoes, he was still shivering. Breathing into his hands to warm them, he looked ahead across the glimmering waves, searching for signs of land. Still young by Doc Alfar standards, a short crop of black hair, parted on the left and curled once about his forehead, framed his boyish, well-balanced face. He possessed tall and notably pointed ears, even among other elves, and they seemed to reflect his curious, adventurous nature. When his especially keen blue eyes saw the first flash of volcanic fires on the horizon, he smiled broadly, revealing a mouthful of healthy white teeth. It was then his honor to cry out, "Jade Harbor, dead ahead, Captain." Their heading was northeast, in the flashing fires of Wahi's volcano Io, directly to the southeast, caressed the clouds with an eerie orange light, like the dance of devils, reflected on the ceiling from the flames of a grand fireplace. The light revealed the mountain at the volcano's feet, and the smaller islands of Nai, Papa'il, and Ululu to the northeast. "Ululu," Sang reported. 10 miles dead ahead, Captain. Wahi Island is in sight, 6 miles out, and 3 points forward of the starboard beam." A broad, mountainous island, Ululu's own northern volcano, was still active, and a column of smoke and flashing fires were constantly at work within it. The rest of the island was an expanse of jungle and lush, fertile valleys, shaped like the open jaws of some ancient beast come to rest on its side. Its jaws and fangs were the mountain, its salvations the sea. Those fangs of stone sheltered Jade Harbor well, protecting mariners from stormy seas, and large enough to contain several fleets of warships. Captured during the early years of the Queen's ascension, it was the premier launching point of the Draconian Navy through centuries of naval conquest. "Well done, midshipman," Commodore Carradine answered. "Inform me when we approach the western shoals." "Aye, aye, skipper," Sang replied. Carradine stood on the command deck, scanning the horizon with his spyglass. Tall and lean, with the instinctive balance of a lifelong sailor, he carried himself well, despite his years. His face bore the wrinkles of a lifetime of challenges met, and a soldier's heartaches without unpleasantness. His hair was shoulder's length, gray and tied back. His eyes were expressive, and the kind of blue that reflected the colors around him. Many ships were anchored outside the harbor, merchantmen, junks, and fishing vessels of all sizes, as well as a handful of dragon ships. "Signal the fleet, JW. All hands to stations. We approach the rendezvous point." "Signal stations," he commanded. And the footnote is about bearings and directions. Okay. The 11th Fleet was comprised of only the very best sailors and marines, and soon every ship in the fleet was alive with activity. The midshipman's cry woke Lieutenant Jill Saxon from her dreams. She had been running with her sister through the small village of Maplewood, her childhood home in the northern province of Bergen. But that seemed like a lifetime ago now. Throwing aside her blankets, she rolled out and sat up. Her quarters were but a small compartment of 8 by 10 feet, located just behind the forward decks. Her bunk, sailor's trunk, and uniforms occupied most of the space. It was a special honor reserved only for the ship's captain and first and second mates. No other sailor bunked alone or enjoyed such privacy, except perhaps for the ship's mage, cook, and physician. The night was cool, so that she had slept in her undergarments. Sitting for a moment, she lingered, enjoying the last of her dream. Caressing the fleeting warmth that remained of her with her covers, she experienced the steady rhythm of her beloved sea beneath them as it slowly rolled the ship about. Almighty Poseidon, she beseeched, hear my plea. Watch over us on this voyage, keep us safe, and if fate allows it, deliver us one day safely back home. This I pray, as a Saxon and faithful protector of the sea. Knowing that the Commodore would call for her at any moment, she dressed with soldier speed. Draconian military standards allowed for a variety of colors and styles, varying from the practical uniforms necessary to the operations of a foot soldier, cavalryman, or archer, to that more fitting to soldiers at sea. Rising from her bed, she took her black pants down from their hanger, stepped into them, and buttoned them at her waist. Her next layer was a generously sleeved white linen shirt, well suited for fencing, over which she buckled a vest of hardened black leather. Checking herself in her small, silver-framed mirror, she studied herself. Tanned and youthful, her eyes were large and brown, with an honest, passionate quality. Fixing her dark braided hair, she sat again and put on her tall black boots. Bouncing up, she took her weapons belt with silver fastenings from the wall, adjusted it, and settled her short sword just behind her right hip, as she was left-handed. A broad, across the shoulder support strap gave her some added protection and kept the weight of her weapons off her waist. On her trunk, beside her most recent piece of scrimshaw, was her very own spyglass. Picking it up, she slung it around her neck. The telescopic device was a parting gift from her father, and worth fully 10 years of her current salary. Keeping it with her reminded her of her father and made her feel like she was never too far from home. Her cabin door opened just behind and beneath the stairs leading up to the forward deck. The rising cliffs that flanked Jade Harbor seemed now to tower above them, lurching out of the sea like a dragon's forbidding black scales. She had sailed here only once before, and the island's majesty still astounded her. The deck was busy. Seagulls circled the ship, croaking excitedly at the promise of small morsels thrown overboard. 2 sailors nearby struggled with the halyards. They were attempting to raise the yards and flatten the sails. "Make some room," she urged. Standing with them, she took hold of the ropes and pulled. "Bit of a breeze, eh?" "Yes, Miss Saxon," one of the sailors replied with a grin. Jill was no stranger to regular duty, and she followed her captain's example in leading from the front. Pulling together, her comrades could not deny the strength of her hands or the power of her back. She stayed with them until they reached their goal, and the lanyards were set and toggled. "As you were," she commanded. Moving to the gunwale, she gazed upon the mighty harbor defenses and the myriad of vessels anchored outside the island. Her enjoyment was not to last. "Miss Saxon," Sergeant Luke said, "the Commodore wants you to join us on the quarterdeck." Inside of her head, she yet heard the voice of her Admiral. "I want you to join us aboard Astorius. I will have need of your intuition and perspective." "Aye, Sergeant," Jill answered. And that's where we'll leave off today's episode, as we're running out of time. And the footnote is just about shipping and nautical terms, halyard, quarterdeck, and so on. So next time we'll begin at the top of page 149, and we'll find out what happens upon Admiral Gravina's warship, the Astorius, next time. Thank you and have a great night.